Hey guys, our presentation is on instructional consultation teams by Michelle and I. So I'm going to start out with what ICTs are. And specifically, they're a consultee-centered approach to problem solving with teachers and all other stakeholders. And typically, like Michelle will go into the details of like who is involved, like who are all the members involved in the actual team meetings. But specifically, some of the research that I'll be talking about, like they use the principal, the facilitator, the teachers, and typically the school psych and everybody like that are usually involved in this. So more specifically, this actual model is used to help stakeholders and teachers understand how to gain knowledge to be used in the classroom. So not only are we like providing them support outside of the classroom, but we're helping them in the classroom as well. More specifically, again, this whole model is focused on effective communication skills. So the teacher, the facilitator, and all other team members really need to have like that effective communication for this model to work. If you're going into a meeting with tension and all these other things, it's really not going to, be effective. So you could pretty much learn how to do that within those meetings as well. So I wanted to put an example in here. So last week I was in a meeting at my prac site, and it was with the special ed department, just like the special ed teachers from each grade, myself, my school psych, and then by the time we left there, people were leaving angry, and like teachers were upset with each other, and it was like a super like confrontational meeting. And I think that this is not something that I wanted to put in an example of like something completely opposite of what an IC team should look like. So this was definitely not something that you would see as an IC team, because that is not effective communication. So if we wanted to look at it the opposite way, we want to see the effective communication part of like each team member providing support and different ideas and thoughts about what could be useful for the student or could be useful for the classroom, and not just one student, but the classroom in general and all other students involved. Okay, so this one I wanted to talk about like the main goals of what an ICT is. So specifically, like we see a teacher and then they come to us with problems, or they come to a team meeting and they're like, I don't know what to do. And then for us, an effective ICT would be to reconceptualize the problem so teachers and so teacher consultee can obtain a greater and new knowledge to be used not only with the target student, but with other students as well. So that means like taking all the information that we've come up with in the meeting and putting it in place in the actual classroom, not just with the target student, but seeing how well it works with other students who may be struggling or may not be up to that point where they need to be a target student as well. But this is where we have teacher support, and we provide that teacher with skills and training and things like that to make them feel more confident in the classroom to deal with specific behaviors or academic supports, because this focuses on both behavior and academic supports. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the components of an ICT. So it's a collaborative model integrating relationship and communication processes. So we've kind of reiterated the emphasis of effective communication, being collaborative, working on, whole classroom deal instead of, just saying, here you go to the teacher and then setting them on their way. It's a more collaborative process than that. Assessment strategies, specific academic and instructional processes, and then academic and behavioral interventions. So like I said before, this actually works on both academic and behavioral. With the components that are listed here, this model supports learning and supports provided in the classroom level. A school psych who adopts this method is focused on a flexible dynamic approach, which means that instead of being a problem to fix, the ability to, and intelligence is something that grows with learning. So like instead of us saying, well, we have this problem with this one student, they think that the ability and their intelligence grows as they get older, and then as they learn more in the classroom and in school and in life, that kind of stuff grows. The exact reason why we need to provide the student and teachers with supports to encourage growth and learning in the classroom environment is super important, and because without the learning, then this concept is technically saying that intelligence and ability is not growing. So we need to make sure that we are giving them those supports in the classroom so that they are growing. For this to be effective, teachers are a critical part of the process, and we are to provide them with resources for the classroom to help enable students to close the achievement gap. This also moves us into the instructional triangle, which Michelle will also talk about later, and she'll go into more detail on that. I won't spoil anything for her, but so she has a whole idea of like what that is and how it's used. Okay, so I want to talk about a couple articles that I found. Specifically, this slide talks about an article that was focused on determining if the problem-solving team is effective in K-12 schools. So they focus specifically on whether it's effective or not. The authors focused on the following things: describing change from isolation to collaboration and teaming in schools, introducing problem-solving teams, which grew in popularity, and number to address student needs, and then review empirical evidence on school-based problem-solving teams using a team science framework, and then summarize the state of the science on problem-solving teams in schools. So throughout this article, they noted that in special ed, there's been an increase in the problem-solving models, which helped to reduce the amount of inappropriate referrals, which is awesome because last semester my practicum supervisor and I really had a sit-down conversation, and she was talking about like all these teachers that are trying to refer these kids, and they're like exploiting the process of the referrals and like the testing situations, and these kids aren't even needing to be tested because they're just either maybe sitting in the wrong spot in the classroom, or maybe the teacher's not, using a good approach or something like that. And there's different things that we could use instead of just saying, hey, let me just refer this kid. So this is one article that kind of talked about like using the special ed is increasing their problem solving approaches, which is great because instead of just saying, hey, let's just refer this kid or let's just throw them in special ed, let's decide what we could do to problem solve first. And then they did state that there is a need for further problem-solving structures in schools. So not just in the special ed department, but in all areas of the school. So in gen ed and all the other things. In the section written by Rosenfeld specifically, each author is noted to have written a specific section in this article. She explains that there's a lack of training and attention to properly implementing this type of model in schools. So this kind of brings me into the next article that I researched, because they took, and I'll go into detail about it, but they took a four-year study, and then they used extensive training, which really helped different aspects of this model to actually work. And by the end of this article, for the problem-solving teams in K-12, they had two major recommendations: the need for team training, which just discussed, and then the need for increased focus on the organizational context for team effectiveness. So these were two major things that came out of this article, that they were like, these are the two main things that we see that may be helpful to having a more effective communication and be able to implement this problem-solving team approach more effectively. Okay, so my final slide kind of is talking about I moved from one thing to seeing if one article to seeing if it works in K 12 schools and what the recommendations might be into a study that specifically used specific methods into implementing this model into the schools. So, more specifically, this article discussed they evaluated the efficacy of the ICTs on student and teacher outcomes. So first they wanted to explore the utilization of ICT in 17, so they used 17 schools that received extensive training for the first 3 years and then support in order to implement this method for 4 years. So to begin, they asked two main research questions. How widely did the utilization of the ICT spread among gen ed teachers during 3 years of post-training implementation? And what principal and facilitator factors are related to the observed differences in teacher utilization rates among schools? So this study specifically took and directly implemented the principle into the actual meetings and everything, and then they used the facilitator and then all the other stakeholders that are involved. So they determined that after the first 3 years, 8 schools met or exceeded 2/3 of the program goal by the end of the 3rd year. By the end of the 4th year, 12 to 17 of the schools attained or exceeded 67% of the program prevalence rates. So this is actually saying that they're actually using these models, which is awesome because whatever training that they did give them, which went into detail, way more detail in the actual article, and it would take too much time for me to explain it because it was a large article. But whatever extensive training they did go into, for the teachers, the actual team meetings and everything was actually working. And the teacher reports on whether or not they were using them was really effective. So not only were they using it with the target students, they were actually using it in their classrooms. And the support that was provided to them was actually useful, and that they were able to say, well, let me take this and then use it with not just one student, but all my students. And then everything else became a little bit more, everything all just kind of fell into place at that point. So the extensive training, like the other article, the previous slide, really talked about was that we really need to put extensive training in this and supports, because we can't just give the teacher something and then send them back to their classroom and say, okay, now do it. We need to be able to be there and say if they need help or they have problems with the information that we've given them, they can come back, effectively communicate the fact that they need, that they effectively can use that stuff in their classroom.
An instructional consultation is the formation of a team consisting of a consultant, for example, the school psychologist, the teacher, special educator, guidance counselor, etc. Members will be discussed in more detail later on. Instructional consultation is intended to help support teachers when working with students, especially in an ecological environment. IC focuses on maximizing academic outcomes through a systematic delivery system. The system looks at any visible academic concerns. The team evaluates each case through problem-solving techniques. The premise of an ICT comes off of the basis of 2 pivotal acts: the No Child Left Behind Act and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, where every child should be given equal opportunity towards academic achievement, even for those who are at risk. Instructional consultation teams are meant to help staff, such as teachers, improve their competence when working with students in achieving maximum academic success. Teachers can work in dyads with the ICT, which has been found to be more effective than working with the entire team at once. The reason why the dyadic method may be more effective is because A, there are a lot of teachers, so addressing concerns to all at once would seem unrealistic. And B, the teacher can build a stronger relationship with a case manager one-on-one versus with a team who may differ in their opinions on what works best, which can result in leaving the teacher even more confused. So, what makes up an instructional consultation team and who does what? An instructional consultation team is usually made up with staff that work to provide support to teachers when working with children. Staff can include the principal, the school psychologist, the guidance counselor, the special educator, a social worker, and an ICT facilitator. Each member is expected to be properly trained in the instructional consultation process and will act as a case manager when working with teachers. A case manager is assigned to a teacher as part of a dyad. The teacher works with a case manager, who is otherwise known as the consultant, and discusses areas of concern for either a specific student or a group of students. The student's behaviors and academic progress may be unsatisfactory, and there may be a mismatch between what the student understands and the material of the task. The ICT team identifies, plans, implements an intervention, monitors the intervention, and evaluates the intervention. This will be discussed in greater detail later on. What is the instructional triangle? The instructional triangle is an interplay between the student, the task at hand, such as a class activity, and the instruction in which the task was delivered to the student or students. The formation between each of these elements is based upon the belief that there may be a mismatch between the student's behavior and the actual task. And this mismatch may be due to the instruction in which the task was delivered to the student or students. This is where the instructional consultation team comes in, where evaluations are made on the route of instruction. These evaluations try to identify ways in which instruction can be improved. The hypothesis is that improved instruction by the instructor will lead to improvement in academic achievement. Another area that is reflected by the instructional triangle is understanding the gaps that exist between each interaction and how these gaps lead to student performance. An example would be the learning styles already embedded in the student and the demands of the task. If the student's learning cannot meet the standards of the task, then this would be another reason for a mismatch. A curriculum-based assessment is done by the instructional consultation team. This assessment is to evaluate and help the teachers understand what learning skills a student has and what methods could be used to help the student apply their ways of learning towards the task. Data were collected on referral and placement patterns of minority students in 13 IC teams schools and 9 comparison schools. Risks included odd ratios and composition indexes. These were calculated and analyzed for the baseline, and the project went on for 2 years. So the project was implemented for 2 years. After 2 years of implementation, there were several significant changes that were observed by the investigators. Firstly, what was noticed was that across all schools, there was a decrease in those considered at risk when being referred for special education. And the second thing that was noticed was that after implementation of an ICT, this led to reduced referrals of minority students. So the purpose of this study was to investigate the effects of instructional consultation teams on teacher efficacy, instructional practices, collaboration, and job satisfaction. The study type that was used was a randomized control design. Based on the findings, what the investigators found was that there were changes in teachers' self-efficacy, but the effects were not visible during year one. However, There were changes that were noted in years 2 and 3, which showed that long term instructional consultation teams did have an impact on teachers' self efficacy. One of the tasks the instructional consultation team includes is problem solving. Specific steps are taken when working towards targeting problems. These steps, although not always linear and meant to be followed in this order, are important to follow in this order. Part of why following these stages in a specific order is important is due to trial and error. It is easier to move back a stage than it would be if 2 or more stages were skipped, only to result in zero effectiveness. Stages in a linear format help the instructional consultation team enter, identify, analyze, design an intervention, plan the intervention, implement the intervention, and evaluate the intervention through progress monitoring of the intervention. And at this point, if there has been no progress, the ICT could move a stage back and make a design, a plan, and implement a new intervention to evaluate. And if the results are positive, the ICT will reach closure. So, what happens at each stage? Stage 1, entry and contracting. There are 2 levels during the beginning process towards problem solving within an instructional consultation team. Entry would refer to introducing the ICT to the school and the community. The purpose would be to educate and inform staff, school officials, parents, and the rest of the community about this delivery system and model. The second level involves contracting with a consultee and making sure that the consultee is properly informed and gives his or her consent, which would allow the ICT to proceed with the problem solving process. Stage 2, problem identification and analysis. This stage can take longer due to the amount of data that must be collected. In addition, the consultee and consultants must have a communication between one another. The consultant must make sure that the data collected reflects the communication they are having with the consultee. Information can be collected through observable measures. Select a method for data collection where there must be at least 3 data points to establish a baseline. Connect the context to the instructional triangle. Make a decision on whether the intervention is required, and establish short-term, long-term, and immediate goals for the student. The student documentation form is also an important means of identification. This form includes student concerns, evaluation of teaching techniques, behaviors, goals, and the inside contains the area where the ICT would note the baseline and the intervention. Stage 3, intervention design and planning. The ICT will then form an intervention. This intervention is meant to target the mismatch that exists between the student's capabilities and the method of instruction along with the task. As the team proceeds with the design, they must answer a few questions such as how often this should be implemented, what materials can be used, and are they accessible, etc. Stage 4, intervention and implementation. Here the intervention has been established. Therefore, the team will implement and monitor the effectiveness of the intervention. The reason why goals are needed and need to be established in an earlier stage is because at this point the ICT will examine whether or not short-term goals are being established within a set time frame, and whether or not this trajectory will lead to long-term goals. If the progress is showing a decline, then the ICT could make adjustments and implement a change in the intervention. Stage 5, evaluation. Intervention is continuously evaluated. This is actually still part of stage 4, but I couldn't edit the slide to 5 bubbles, so I just made this stage 5, but it's actually part of stage 4. So the last stage, it would be closure slash termination. This is where the ICT and the consultee determine if whether or not the process was satisfactory. If yes, then steps would be taken towards termination, but this would mean that the goals would have been met. If the process did not result in a positive effect, then the consultee and consultant can re-examine the intervention design along with the data collected and plan out what should be done to increase effectiveness.